I often see people talk about the James Webb as being like the replacement for Hubble, but in my opinion, the James Webb never will or never was intended to be a replacement for the Hubble Space Telescope, because those two telescopes serve very different purposes, and that's what I'm going to tell you about today. Let's start with some physical characteristics. The Hubble Space Telescope has a 2.4 meter mirror, whereas James Webb has a 6.5, giving James Webb around 7 times more light gathering capability. The whole layout of the telescopes is obviously very, very different. Hubble is known actually for its having these 4 spikes, the same as we often see in Newtonians, which kind of was a little weird to me due to the way this telescope is built, but the secondary mirrors is actually set up with spider vanes inside the telescope. So that's why we see those 4 spikes. However, on the James Webb, it has all these hexagon-shaped mirrors, and that means you get these very, very characteristic 6-pronged diffraction spikes on the images that we see from James Webb, making them very unique and very easy to spot that you see a James Webb image because of the number of spikes you see on the stars. The two telescopes also designed to work on different wavelengths. The Hubble Space Telescope can go all the way down to like 100 nanometers up to around 2.5, mainly focusing on visible, ultraviolet, and a little bit into the infrared area. James Webb, on the other hand, can only go down to 600 nanometers, and it can go all the way up to a wavelength of 28,500, meaning it can go deep into the infrared. And this is where the two telescopes have their main differences. Hubble focuses a lot around the visual light, a lot of these lines that we can see ourselves with our own telescopes. But James Webb is designed to go mainly infrared. That allows us to see further and allows us to see things that Hubble can't. The two telescopes also have very different orbits. Hubble is orbiting around Earth in an orbit around 550 kilometers above the surface. This is handy because this has allowed NASA, at least when they have the space shuttle program, to service the telescope, replace parts, upgrade parts along the way. James Webb, on the other hand, is orbiting what's called Lagrange 2. This is a stable, gravitationally stable point further away from, in a straight line between the Sun and Earth, and then away from the Earth. It's orbiting around out there. Now, I say it's stable, it's actually more of a saddle point kind of thing. So it's stable in its orbit, but it's not stable radially. So it does need fuel in order to maintain this orbit. But so does Hubble. Because Hubble is orbiting so close to Earth, there is a slight amount of drag, and that means from time to time it needs to boost its orbit up in order for not to crash. So Hubble needs fuel as well in order to stay in orbit. Now, when you talk about space telescopes, you talk about a parameter called the field of regard. The field of regard is the area of the sky, of the night sky, that the telescope can see at any given point. Because Hubble is so close to Earth, the Earth is just going to be in the way of pretty much half of the sky, giving Hubble a field of regard of about 50%. So at any given time, Hubble can only see 50% of the night sky. If it wants to take pictures of something that's not in this current field of regard, it's going to have to wait until it orbits around to the other side. And you might think, oh, so James Webb, that is like 1.5 million kilometers away out of Lagrange 2, must have an amazing field of regard. But actually, no, it doesn't. Because if you look at James Webb, it has this heat shield, and this heat shield must always be pointing towards the sun. Because if it doesn't, the instrument's going to get too hot, it can't image. Because it's taking images of these infrared areas, it is so susceptible to heat. It needs to be cold, that's why these heat shields are there. And that means it can't just turn any way it wants. And that means it can only really rotate around in like a circle, keeping the heat shield always pointed. Now, there is some flexibility in here so that it can tilt a little bit. The shields are slightly bigger than they need to be to cover it, giving it a little bit of tilt. With that little bit of tilt, it allows James Webb to have a field of regard around 39% of the night sky. Take a look at this. This is, of course, the famous Pillars of Creation taken by Hubble. The Pillars of Creation is a star-forming region that produces new stars. They are formed inside the pillars, where you have these gas clouds, and inside them, if there's just a slight gravitational instability, the gas is going to begin to collapse. As it collapses, because of thermodynamics, it's going to heat up, and when it gets hot enough, fusion begins and you have a protostar. All these things happen inside a gas cloud, and we can only really see those new young stars after they become old enough and after the fusion process is aggressive enough that it can push out all that gas and push it away, revealing the star inside. Hubble is not able to look through the gas, but James Webb can. This is the same pillars of creation taken by James Webb, and put them up side to side. Notice how much more stars we can see, and that's just because a lot of these stars were just blocked by the gas. But because James Webb can go into these extreme infrared, we can look through the gas and we can see the stars inside the gas, and that means we're going to be able to look at stars earlier in their life than we could with a visual telescope. So we get a lot more information about these really young, early, what's called a protostar, where it's just started, but it's not really a star yet, as it still have this envelope of gas around it. So we get a peek into that and get more information about all these new young stars and the star formation process. Now, one of the other famous pictures from Hubble is, of course, the Hubble Deep Field. This was when NASA just decided to point Hubble at a point in the night sky where they expect there to be nothing. There were no known stars, it was just a blank, dark spot, and just stare at it for, I think it did days of total integration time. And it just kept collecting more and more data, and we got this amazing Hubble Deep Field where we would just see a whole fleet of galaxies, and just shows that there must be millions, billions of these galaxies out there. But looking at different galaxies is one of the other key differences where James Webb excels over Hubble. While the pictures we've seen from Hubble is amazing, the problem is these distant galaxies, their light has been redshifted because of the expansion of the universe. The light gets redder and redder and redder. These very distant galaxies that has been redshifted so far into the infrared that Hubble can't see them, but James Webb can. Added to that, as we talked about in the beginning, this increased mirror size, meaning it can collect more light so it can see fainter objects, means that James Webb is an excellent telescope for looking at some of the earliest galaxies in the beginning of our universe, some of the first ever formed galaxies. Now, why is this interesting? Well, because if we look at the light from these, we're going to be able to look at we can basically calculate backwards and say, okay, we know it's been redshifted this much. What was it like when it was emitted? And we can use that to tell something about the overall star composition of that galaxy compared to what we see with galaxies today. And that's going to give us a way to measure how the universe has evolved over those 13 plus billion years that we expected to have existed. But let's talk about the future of these two telescopes. Both of them are, at the time of this recording, still operational. However, Hubble is on its last legs. It has seen multiple repair missions throughout its life, and it has received its last repair mission. After NASA discontinued the space shuttle program, they're no longer able to go up and service the telescope. So Hubble is going to be functioning as long as it allows, until eventually it's going to be decommissioned. It has been refueled, and it still has fuel to keep boosting its own orbit for about another 10 years, so it's not going to run out of fuel anytime soon. What's more likely to happen is that some of these gyroscopes that's inside the telescope are going to fail. These have already been replaced a number of times. These gyroscopes basically helps Hubble point in the right direction so it knows which way it's pointing. And if these gyroscopes are not functioning, Hubble doesn't know which way it's pointing, and a telescope that doesn't know which way it's pointing is not very good. These seems to be the thing that's likely going to kill Hubble. When these eventually die, they're not going to be able to point the telescope, and they will likely have to decommission it. The way you decommission telescopes is you put them into what's called a graveyard orbit. It's a very specific orbit that sends it in over Canada, and as it leaves Canada, it flies down over the Atlantics, south of Africa, and then the next time it sees land is going to be when it comes up over around Australia. The reason you set it into these orbits is because that is the longest distance that it can orbit without going over land, and that means then you just aim for it to crash down somewhere along this long piece of flight over the ocean, so it doesn't crash into a city or someone's house, or someone gets part of Hubble falling through their roof. NASA actually did something similar with a space station a while back called Skylab, where they try to put it into the exact same graveyard orbit and crash it down, It didn't really work so well. They miscalculated a little bit and the whole thing crashed into Australia. I have a video about it. I'll be linking it if you're interested. It's quite a funny story, and Australia ended up sending NASA a fine for littering, and it was a whole thing. It's hilarious. You should go watch that as well. When it comes to the operational life of James Webb, I briefly talked about earlier that the orbit around Lagrange 2 is a semi-stable orbit. So that means that James Webb does need to consume fuel in order to stay in the orbit. It was designed to have fuel for around 10 years, but they actually managed to get the maneuvers it was doing as we're getting out to Lagrange point a lot more efficient than we were expecting. And they were also doing fewer maneuvers, smaller maneuvers than they initially expected when they calculated the fuel need. And that means that it actually has excess fuel compared to what the mission was designed for. So assuming that James Webb is not going to see any mechanical or software failures, then it should have fuel for a lot more than 10 years, probably going up around 20 or maybe 30 years before it's going to run out of fuel. So we have a lot more interesting science coming out of James Webb in the next decades to come. We're now heading towards the southwest Australian town Esperance. Back then in '79, so they took this big infrared telescope and they put it in the back of an old 747. This is of course a huge engineering